Vladimir Vladimirovich, we have just watched your meeting on rare earth metals. I'm sorry, but I think that now all the journalists of the world are rarely interested in earth metals, but in a slightly different aspect. After all, the United States, to put it very mildly, urges Zelensky to sign an agreement with them regarding these resources. To pay for the assistance to Ukraine of the former administration, the Biden administration. How do you assess the prospect of such an agreement? It doesn't concern us. I don't evaluate it in any way, and I don't even want to think about it. Of course, it would be necessary to evaluate these resources, how real they are, how many of these resources there are, how much they cost, and so on. But this, I repeat, is not our business. But the fact that our business is what we discussed at the meeting just now. Rare earth metals are a very important component, very important resources for modern sectors of the economy. While we are doing little in this direction, we must do more. And the point of today's meeting is aimed at concentrating administrative resources for work in this area at the first stage. By the way, we would be ready to offer our American partners, when partners, meaning only administrative, government structures and companies, if they showed interest in working together. We certainly have an order of magnitude. I want to emphasize this, an order of magnitude, more resources of this kind than in Ukraine. Russia is one of the conditional leaders in the reserves of these rare earth metals. We have them in the north, in Murmansk, in the Caucasus, in Kabardino-Balkaria, in the Far East, in the Irkutsk region, in Yakutia, in Taiva. These are quite capital-intensive investments, capital-intensive projects. We would be happy to work together with any foreign partners, including American ones. Yes, by the way, as for the new territories, the same thing. We are ready to attract foreign partners and our so-called new historical territories, which have been returned to the Russian Federation. There are also certain reserves there. We are ready with our partners, including American works. In the regions too. Of course. These days, we generally see a flurry of statements and discussions, and everyone is discussing Trump, why he says so harshly that Zelensky should go to the polls, that he has a rating of 4%. The Europeans are very critical of Trump for all these statements. And in general, such opinions are already being voiced that the current approach of the US president, he rather plays into the hands of Russia. Do you think that's really the case? I believe that this is absolutely not the case. I have it flowing, my own point of view, and it is the opposite of the one you have just outlined. The fact is that the current head of the Kiev regime, is becoming a toxic figure for the armed forces of Ukraine, because he gives unfair orders dictated not by military considerations, but by political considerations. While it is unclear what they are based on, this leads to unjustifiably large losses, if not to say very large or catastrophic losses, for the Ukrainian army. It becomes toxic to society as a whole. And this is evidenced, in my opinion, by today's vote in the Rada on the extension of his powers. Finally, he stymied himself with a decree banning negotiations with the Russian Federation on a peace treaty, and stopped these negotiations. And what's the point? The fact is that he evades these negotiations. Why? Because if these negotiations start, it will sooner or later, and, most likely, quickly lead to the need to lift martial law. And as soon as this happens, we should immediately go to the polls. Then there will be no reason not to hold elections. After all, today elections in Ukraine are not held under the pretext of martial law. If there are negotiations, then there is a possible quick need to lift martial law, but we must immediately go to the polls. And this is where the current head of the regime has problems, because it doesn't matter how much he has. In fact, it doesn't matter how many percent he has, there are 4 or how many. The important thing is that he has a rating. According to our data, they are of an objective nature, exactly 2 times less than that of his closest possible political rival. This is Mr. Pawnee, the former commander of the armed forces in Ukraine, who was exiled to London. He has exactly twice the rating. And if we add to this the possible support for this possible candidate from other political figures, including former prime ministers or former presidents, then there is absolutely no chance of the current regime winning the elections. They are equal to 0. But unless, of course, something is being manipulated rudely, and this is also bad for him, it will be quite noticeable. Therefore, it is a factor in the decomposition of the army, society, and the state. And the current President Trump probably understands this and pushes him to the polls. What does he want to do, as it seems to me? He wants to improve the situation, the political situation in Ukraine, consolidate society, create conditions for the survival of the Ukrainian state. And in general, this is not so much for the benefit of Russia. We still have a conflict with the current regime, as it is for the benefit of Ukraine itself. Among other things, the current president announced that he wants to achieve peace. By the way, so do we, and as soon as possible. And the current head of the regime, he is on the way to achieving this goal. Hence the position, as it seems to me, of the President in the United States. And it is not related to the fact that it is in our interests, in the Russian. This is most likely in the interests of Ukraine, the Ukrainian state, in order to preserve Ukrainian statehood, which we also have nothing against. Although, of course, we would like this territory not to be used as a springboard for attacks on the Russian Federation, not to be used as a hostile springboard, so that eventually it turns into a friendly neighboring state. We have been hearing a lot of different Trump statements every day. You have met him more than once. Recently you had a telephone conversation. Does it act on the basis of emotions? Of course not. Well, naturally, the current head of the regime in Kiev gives a reason to show these emotions. But from what I have just said, something completely different emerges. This is an action-based, rather than on emotions, but on cold calculation, on a rational approach to the current situation. In the current situation, oddly enough, we, frankly speaking, were interested in him sitting there and further corrupting the regime, with which we are in an armed conflict. But from the point of view of the interests of strengthening Ukrainian statehood, of course, it is necessary to act, apparently, energetically, and in a completely different direction, to bring to power people who will enjoy the trust of the people of Ukraine. But the Europeans, do they even understand, in my opinion, the essence of the current situation around Ukraine? Well, you have to ask them that. Judging by the way they act, I don't think they really understand. But that's not even the point. The fact is that, unlike the new President of the United States, the political leaders of European states are associated with the current regime, engaged. And they've talked too much and promised too much. And now, excuse me for the simplicity of expression, they are being driven away from this position. It is very difficult, or almost impossible for them without losing face, and bearing in mind that they are in a rather difficult and responsible internal political period of elections, re-elections, difficulties in parliaments, and so on. Then, taking into account this circumstance, to change their position, for it is almost impossible for them. Unlike them, the current President of the United States, the new president, has an elected president. His hands are free, he is free from these fetters that do not allow him to move forward and work towards resolving the conflict. That's why he has a character. Probably, he acts straightforwardly and without much embarrassment. Here he has a unique position. He doesn't just say what he thinks. He says he wants to. Well, this is the privilege of the leader of one of the major great powers. I asked you a few days ago in St. Petersburg that everyone now wants to have a certain right to vote in the Russian-American negotiations. But here are the Europeans. The Europeans continue to insist and demand the right to vote in the negotiations around Ukraine. How do you regard this? I don't see anything wrong here. Well, probably no one can demand anything here, especially from Russia. Let them demand something expensive from someone. They have been demanding anything from their nasals for thousands of years. Now they are already being demanded of them. Therefore, let them sit at home with their demands and think about how they came to such a life. But their participation in the negotiation process is in demand, of course, but we have never refused. We were in constant discussion with them. At some point, under all sorts of far-fetched ideas to defeat Russia on the battlefield, they themselves refused to contact us. Will they want to come back? I also saw the reaction to our telephone conversation with the US president. I saw the reaction to the high-level meeting in Ariada. Really emotional and devoid of any practical meaning. Because in order to solve complex and even acute issues, including on the Ukrainian track, both Russia and the United States should take the first step. What is it? This first step should be devoted to increasing the level of trust between both states. That's exactly what we were doing with Vyad. This is exactly what the next, maybe other high-level contacts will be devoted to. Without this, it is impossible to solve any issue, including an issue as complex and acute as the Ukrainian crisis. But what does the Europeans have to do with it? This concerns bilateral Russian-American relations. Why do we need them here? What are they going to do here? But on these, and in a telephone conversation, by the way, and at a meeting in Ariada, so that, of course, the problem related to the Ukrainian crisis is touched upon in a very substantive way, but it was not essentially discussed in itself. We have only agreed that we will approach this, but in this sense, and in this case, of course, we do not refuse the participation of our European countries. But I want to emphasize that we respect the position of our friends from BRICS, who have created a group of supporters of peace. I just talked with the President of the People's Republic of China today, and we also talked about this. He informed me that the peace group will meet in New York in the near future and will discuss. We do not only welcome this. We are also grateful to all our partners who raise these issues, who strive to ensure that peace is achieved. And what am I talking about? Not only Europeans, but also other countries have the right to participate, and we treat this with respect. I would like to ask you to comment on a few more statements dramas, about which, as I said, there are a lot. He, for example, told, but not all of them. That's it. For example, he said that he wants to suggest that you and the head of China reduce the defense budget of this. How do you like this idea? I know, I can guess what it's based on. This is based, apparently, on the calculations of one, in my opinion, from British research centers. where it is said that our spending on purchasing power parity was calculated. Last year the United States had, in my opinion, $968 billion, and if we add up Russian and Chinese spending, it is approximately, well, somewhere around the numbers beat like this. Russian, Chinese together, if compared with American. First of all, we need to calculate it all. These are the calculations of the British Center. It may be correct, it may not be very correct, or it may be completely incorrect. Look at this. I cannot comment in any way on how the People's Republic of China treats this. There have been various approaches from the American side regarding strategic offensive weapons and other very serious issues. Therefore, this is a matter for the People's Republic of China. But we could negotiate with the United States. We don't mind. It seems to me that the idea is good. The United States would cut by 50%, and we would cut by 50%. Well, the People's Republic of China would then join if it wanted to. We believe that the proposal is good, and we are ready for discussion on this matter. Trump also imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports at 25% from all countries. And we once worked quite well in the USA on the topic of aluminum in general. How do you like this trade policy? You know, I don't want to comment on the trade policy of the United States right now. It has been linked to sanctions for many years. We consider these sanctions illegal and harmful to world trade and the economy. And it, in my opinion, damages both us and those who impose these sanctions. As for trade policy, increased rates, duties, and so on. But it is each country that determines independently what is profitable for it, what is not profitable. I can understand the logic, drag production to myself, create jobs, force taxes to be paid to all levels of the tax system, and so on and so on. But at some stage, of course, these actions will face certain difficulties associated with inflationary pressure, with an increase in the cost of goods, and so on. But the experts know this, they will tell you this in detail. As for aluminum, the fact that in the 2017 year, in my opinion, we supplied about 15% of all American imports. About 15% came from Russia. In general, in the USA, if my memory serves me correctly, they produce about 60% of the necessary aluminum themselves, and receive 40% by import. 15% of it came from the Russian Federation. The main importer today is Canada. If it is decided to open the American market for our producers, we could sell about 2 million tons on the American market. This would not significantly affect the formation of prices, but, in my opinion, it would still have a restraining effect on price stabilization. But apart from that, and most importantly, in my opinion, it is that we could think together with American companies about working together in this area. Well, for example, in the Krasnoyarsk territory, back in Soviet times, there were plans to build a new hydroelectric power station and create additional aluminum production facilities. After all, aluminum. This is, first of all, energy, and preferably cheap energy. Hydropower is cheap, and, among other things, it is also so environmentally friendly. Therefore, there are already repeating the Soviet times, there were such plans. This is, however, a capital-intensive, investment-intensive project. According to preliminary estimates, It was or will be worth about 15 billion in today's scenes. We can think about it. Yes, the policy of the current president today is to place production on the territory of the United States. But if their American companies work with us, then this is also a benefit, and a considerable one. Because the companies will earn diligently, and the corresponding volumes of aluminum will enter the domestic market at absolutely acceptable market prices. There is something to think about here, as well as on joint work on rare earth metals. And in other areas, including, let's say, energy. By the way, a few minutes ago I read another US news. President Trump said that the United States and Russia are discussing major economic projects in the framework of negotiations on Ukraine. Yes, some of our companies are in contact with each other, and we are discussing such projects. Thank you very much. Thank you.